Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 75, Hidden Heroes. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the movie Men in Black. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, too. Thank you very much. And what's new in your writing world?
Newness, same thing, just working on editing Zara 2. Yeah, I wish there was more to report, but that's it. How about you? What's going on in your writing world?
You know what? Your editing is the journey of 1,000 miles, right? And you just have to keep taking the steps to get it done.
Yeah.
I am writing. That's what my report is. I am now, 14%, I think, on Meridian, which is the third book in my space opera science fiction series, The Adventures of the Imperial Guard. How far would you say you are in your editing of Zara 2? What percentage would you guess?
Oof, I don't know, maybe 25%.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, very slow. I'm very slow at editing. It's like it takes me a long time for some reason. I can write faster than I can edit usually.
Yeah. You know, I was listening to a podcast the other day. It was the Creative Penn podcast, Joanna Penn, if anyone's interested in listening to that podcast. And she was interviewing someone who is what did she call herself? An intuitive discovery writer. And she was talking about how she wrote, and she was exactly describing how I write, where you jump in, like we've talked about before. I know my big plot points, but I let myself just sort of explore as I do, how I'm going to get there. And then she said she often goes back and edits as she's writing, which is what I do too.
Yeah.
So which makes editing for me a lot easier at the end because I've already done it.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people write. Some people will write. I saw this talk by this guy who he just writes the first draft and then starts over from scratch and completely rewrites for the next draft.
Wow.
And that just seems like utter madness to me. I wouldn't write if I had to do that.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that either. But you're absolutely right. It's so unique to each writer and how it works. And I think there's a kind of beauty in that.
Yeah.
That everybody's process, like everybody's story, is really unique to themselves.
Yeah, yeah. And it gives you different types of stories.
And as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Tales of Zara. First book is available on Amazon in both episodic format on Kindle Vella, as well as available in ebook and paperback. And you can also read The Adventures of the Imperial Guard, which is my space opera science fiction series. And that is available in draft as it's being written on Patreon at the Galactic Heroes level. So if you sign up, you can read the 2 drafts that are already available, the first 2 books in this 5-book series, as well as updates on my work in progress, Meridian, as it's being written. I'll release those updates weekly. So that's available for those who are interested in reading that right now and don't want to wait for the series release. And all those links will be in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books and movies and television?
I was just watching it's the second season of Yellow Jackets.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a Showtime show. I'm not sure. It's a story where this girls' sports team crashes in the wilderness, and they have to survive. And the story cuts back and forth between their time after the crash and surviving there, and then into like the present day, which is, I think, 20 years later, something like that. So we see like how it affected them, and it's sort of paranormally, maybe. It's kind of unclear whether there's paranormal stuff that happens or it was just in their heads. But it seems like there's paranormal stuff that's going on. I think it's a lot better than the first season. The first season,
I remember you talking about the first season.
Yeah.
I'm being frustrated with the end.
Yeah, it started off really slow, and then like I don't know, maybe halfway through things started actually happening.
Yeah.
So this one picks up and things are going much more quickly from the start. So I think the second season works a lot better. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I was watching.
Okay.
What have you been watching or reading?
Finished watching the latest Doctor Who series, the latest season. And then after that, I started watching old Star Trek movies.
That's great.
It's because we watched Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
And we talked about that in our last podcast, which as of the recording of this podcast has not yet been published, will be published a couple days from now. But because we talked about that, watched Wrath of Khan and talked about it, I started watching the other movies in the series. So that's been kind of fun. And started reading the novel that we're going to be talking about in a couple weeks. So yeah, that's. I feel like there's more, but I can't think of anything else. I watched a documentary on the life of Gene Wilder, which was fun.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, that's about it.
So how far have you gotten in the Star Trek movies?
I finished Undiscovered Country.
Oh, okay.
So
quite a ways.
that far. And I don't ever watch the fifth movie.
Yeah. Once was enough for me.
Pretend it doesn't exist.
I saw that movie in the theater and just I couldn't believe what I had seen when it ended. I was just like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason to rewatch that.
What's been really fascinating to me watching these movies is how different the soundtracks are. Like the composer, they've got different composers and the music that they've selected. 2 and 3 were both composed by James Horner. James Horner's style is recognizable. And then for the fourth movie, and I don't remember the name of the composer, but the feeling of the music is so different. It's almost like a movie that's taking place in the turn of the century in a small town in middle America where it's about ready to start some state fair. I mean, it's just so bippy and happy. It doesn't sound science fiction-y.
That's funny.
And then you get to Undiscovered Country, which is very intense. The music is incredibly intense. And just as the music finally fades down, and this is all at the very beginning, because this is back in the days when, they would throw up the title and then they would have all the stars and the producers and all that stuff, information at the beginning of the movie. And so just as the music wipes down, then, the planet Praxis blows up. So that's the beginning of that movie is really intense from the movie, from the music to, then all of a sudden the planet blows up and there's anyway, it's just very interesting, the different approaches that they took.
Yeah.
So are you ready to talk about Men in Black?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's begin. Today we're talking about the story told in the movie Men in Black, and I am going to read the short synopsis from IMDb. James, a New York City cop, is hired by Agent K of a secret government agency that monitors extraterrestrial life on Earth. Together, they must recover an item that has been stolen by an intergalactic alien. Do you like this movie?
Yeah, I do enjoy this movie. I like, right from the start, this is a good example of starting off in media res, as they say, like in the middle of events, not necessarily action, but as things are already going. We see back in the past, the Men in Black, I guess not too much in the past, it's not that far. The Men in Black are in action, right? We get to see an alien that's pretending to be human. We see the authority of the Men in Black. We see their gadgets. We see how Kay keeps calm. We're introduced to his character. We see them use the flashy thingy to forget me stick. So we get a setup really quick in motion of them doing what they do. And then again, we see the same kind of thing with Will Smith's character. We see him in action chasing down a criminal. It turns out to be an alien and pulls him into that world. So the movie starts really fast. It engages you very quickly and pulls you into the action. It sets up sort of the tone that we're going to get throughout the movie. So I think it launches you into their story world in a quick and good way. I thought the whole first act was great. It introduces, the characters very well, introduces the world, introduces the looming threat that they're going to be facing. We get to see the setup of the older Men in Black agent retiring, and that, requires them to bring on a new agent. And then, of course, that's paid off again at the end later. And I think overall, the structure of the story works very well, and the pacing and the plotting continue to please the viewer. And after Act 1, we learn the larger scope of the story, obviously, and because of the murder of this royal alien and his species wanting the galaxy back, there's this whole threat to the Earth. And they do a good job of setting up this countdown that we've mentioned before in the final act, where there's this rush to get things done within a certain time before everything goes bad. And overall, I think it's a fun sci-fi action movie. Very little of this movie is believable or makes a whole lot of sense, but somehow it still works. I think because it's focused on the silly and the creative and the fun. They knew what they wanted to do and they went for it, and they made that type of movie. And I think it works. There's a good interplay between the two main characters. You have the serious K and then the more joking J, and that sets up good moments between them. So character-wise, I think it's fun. I think the tone of the story is consistent throughout. Things like the tabloids being accurate when they're presenting seemingly crazy stories, that those turn out to be true, especially with respect to aliens, obviously. And you have things like the alien who gets his head shot off and can regrow it. I mean, these things are kind of out there, but they work in the context of this world that they created, right? You have a tiny alien living inside a robotic human body. So there's all these different ways they have of the aliens blending in with Earth. And that's just a fun concept of there's this whole secret thing that's happening that nobody knows about. And they give us a reason why nobody knows, because they have the little flashy thing that wipes out people's memories whenever they see this stuff. So they do a good job of setting all that stuff up. I think it's fun. There's obviously less about character development in this story. Will Smith is pretty much the same character from beginning to end. We do get to see Kay decide that he wants to retire at the end, which they sort of foreshadowed at the beginning. Although it didn't seem like something that was necessarily too evident throughout the story, but it worked. The movie works structurally. I think it's fun. I think it has good humor. The aliens and the effects work well. And in the story, in the universe, the story generally makes sense, even though it may not necessarily make sense to us in the real world. So I think it all comes together pretty good. I think they do a good job with it, and I liked it overall. What do you think? What aspects of this movie do you like?
I'm a big fan of this movie as well, and for a lot of the same reasons that you identified. I think that the blending of this sort of 60s era secret agent tone with the science fiction alien thing is really brilliant. Is there any other story or book or movie, television series that we've seen that does this? I know that the X-Files did this. You had your agents investigating aliens and the paranormal, but they didn't do it in sort of a get smart kind of way.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever done that? Because I think it feels pretty unique, and I can't think of anything else, but I may just be forgetting something.
Yeah, there may be something that's more specific like this. I think Loki show kind of does something like that, where it has kind of this, older technology stuff as they're investigating what's going on.
The only thing I could think of was there was an episode of the original Star Trek where I forget what the title is, but you had this character Gary Seven with the cat, and Terry Garr was
Right. Yeah.
assistant, and they had at one time thought that they might set up a show around these characters, and that kind of felt the same way, sort of like a 60s era secret agent looking for extraterrestrials, aliens on Earth. Probably way ahead.
Yeah, that's true. That's funny.
That's what it felt like. Anyway, it's just so enjoyable. And because of that, it's very tongue-in-cheek, which also makes it enjoyable. Like you said, that tongue-in-cheek sort of sense to the movie makes it easier to overlook the things that just don't feel quite true to real life, but that's okay because it's fun.
Yes.
I agree 100%. We jump right into the action, and we get the introduction to the main characters and the villain in like the first 3 segments. And it also has some of that connectivity that we talked about in Independence Day, where from one scene to the next, it's related.
Yes.
It's got some connectivity to it so that all those scenes are threaded together before we get into the main body of the story. And we even know what the conflict of the story is right at the very beginning. I mean, it's just, bam, bam, bam. Okay, now we're going to go. And then it sort of slows down a little bit for some character work. We get to know Jay a little bit more. We get to know Kay a little bit more. We spend some time, Jay taking all the tests, and we learn how different he is from the other candidates. Kind of does his own thing. And we actually spend quite a bit of time watching him think about it. When you think about how tight everything else is, watching him sit on a bench and think about it is a lot of screen time compared to everything else. But I think it works.
That's true. Yeah.
I think it really works because he is the stand-in for us. And so we're processing everything that we just got. And so I think it actually works. And what I really love is more threading there, where Kay says to him, "I'll give you until sunrise." And then sunrise comes. We spend a lot of time watching him sitting on the bench thinking, and then sunrise comes and we think, okay, we're going to find out what his answer is. And no, we see the villain rolling in to New York at sunrise. So that takes that really low sort of contemplative moment and ramps it back up again. There is a ticking clock here.
Yeah.
And so it's just a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun. I agree with you. There's magnificent setups and payoffs throughout. It's very tight. There's no extra fat on this movie. Every scene relates to something else, and it moves forward quickly and cleanly and well. And the other piece of it that you pointed out is the humor is so important, and we get the humor exactly when we need it. The humor is accompanying. We've seen this before too. Where have we seen this? Where we have the humor accompanying something horrible that just happens, something gross. I think was it Independence Day? Where we have something that's horrible and scary, and then there's humor immediately following to take the edge off of that. I forget which movie it was, and I think it was.
Yeah, I know we just talked about it recently. It might have been Independence Day.
But so you have that here. Like, take for example when the villain puts on the Edgar suit, right? And he walks into the house and demands sugar water, and then she's like, "Your skin is hanging off your bones," and he pulls the skin away. Right? That's horrifying, absolutely horrifying. But then she faints. That's funny. You're constantly kept on the lighter end of the whole story, and it makes it a lot of fun. Yeah, I think it's just a fun film, and watching it through the eyes of looking at the story, it made me really appreciate how tight and well constructed this story is.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think, it's not story related, but I think the cast really pulled it off well.
Yeah.
With Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith and Vincent D'Onofrio and Rip Torn, like they all played their parts perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. So is there anything that you might have changed as a writer?
Yeah, there was a few things I would have changed. It's hard to say when a movie works well, how changes would affect it. Might be for worse. I didn't really buy the aliens coming to destroy Earth because they wanted their galaxy back. Because then presumably they would be destroying the galaxy that they came for there in the first place. So I think they could have gotten a similar effect by just, we're going to destroy MIB headquarters or something like that. Make the threat just as powerful to the main characters that we're following. Maybe make a little bit more sense. So that would be one thing that I might change. And then we have Jay, who's basically, from what I can tell, and I'm interested to hear your opinion on this, it seemed like he was basically a stalwart character. He doesn't really change over the course of the story, at least internally, in any significant way. We don't see him necessarily struggling with something at the start and then he overcomes that. I might like to have seen something where Jay learns just one element that he has to use in the climactic moment to give that character some growth and show that, okay, now he's more capable of being a higher level agent and training the next person. Because it kind of jumps right into, oh, now he has someone, at the end who he's kind of training, but he's just been there for like one day. So I would have liked to have seen something maybe if he had trust issues at the beginning and then he had to trust his partner when Kay said he was going after his weapon by jumping in the mouth of this thing. Just something like that. Or maybe there was something there and I just totally missed it. So that's why I'm curious to see what you have to say about it. But otherwise, like you said, it's a very, very tight story. It works because they set up the zaniness of it from early on, and that's carried throughout. So there's a lot that you can forgive with it. And it's just fun. And you follow it along. And it's like this, yeah, like you said, maybe a Get Smart type thing. It's like an alien, silly sci-fi detective-y story. It's a good mix of what it does. But anyway, those are the two things that came to mind as I was watching it. Do you have anything that you would change? And what do you think about the characters?
The only thing I would change, which is something incredibly, deeply personal, and I may be the only one in the world who feels this way, but I would have liked less goop and fewer bugs. Other than that,
I'm sure you're not the only person who feels that way.
Other than that, I think it was fine. About the characters, it's really interesting that you should talk about, like the character arc about, Kay's character arc, Jay's character arc, because to me, that lends itself to the question of theme, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And I actually struggled a bit with theme. So the theme that I came away with kind of goes towards the characters. So I'll go ahead and sort of slide into that kind of sideways here. The only thing that I could see Jay doing as far as like a character arc was accepting the change of this new reality. And it goes to, for me, it went to the statement that, it's the famous statement that is said as they're sitting on the bench and talking about whether Jay is going to join the Men in Black or not. And that is, a person is smart, people are stupid, crazed animals, right? Or whatever the line is. And it's Jay's recognition and realizing of what that means for him as he takes on this role. Because for the rest of the movie, as he's figuring out what it means to be a man in black, he's having to accept this new reality and accept the change of this new reality. And I think that's what we see at the end when he accepts that Kay is leaving. All this time he's been relying on Kay, learning from Kay, trying to figure out who he is in this new world. When Kay says, I'm retiring, he accepts it and says, in Kay says, I'm going to miss or whatever, I'll see you around. And he says, no, you won't. That's his moment of acceptance. That's the moment that he is like fully now a man in black. That's what I saw as his arc. It's a very, very subtle thing, if that's even actually accurate. So that was what I was thinking.
Yeah, as far as the theme.
Well, as far as like the character arc too.
Yeah. I mean, I struggled with it for the same reasons. I don't know. I guess I see what you're saying, but it's very loose.
Yes, I agree.
But that tends to be the case with this kind of story, right? This is sort of it's kind of a mix of a buddy cop story, with a James Bond story. Like if you look at most James Bond stories, certainly pre Daniel Craig, he's not really going through any internal changes. He is the stalwart hero. He changes the world around him, right? He's saving the world and maybe some other people he meets along the way, but he's not going through a whole lot of character growth. So that's kind of what this movie struck me as, at least in terms of Jay. If we look at, the Will Smith character as sort of the main protagonist that we're following, he's kind of that way. He's going to a new organization and he is going through changes from the perspective of having to learn this new stuff. But he seems pretty cool with that pretty quickly. It's not like to me, it didn't seem like he's really struggling with that. he has to learn for sure, but internally he kind of accepts it pretty quickly. It felt like. So I had kind of the same struggle. I think there's a slight message with Kay, which is something like it's okay to bow out of the fight when you know it's time. Something like that, right? Of him accepting, okay, I've done all I can do. More than this I can't handle, and I'm going to go off into the sunset. We get something there. Otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's more of a standard, just generic-y action theme of you should be willing to risk your life to save others because it's the right thing to do without expectation of any recognition. Because they're doing this all in secret, no one's going to know. So that's like the larger theme I pulled out of it, is this idea of just doing this because it's right, because someone has to step up, and you're never going to be recognized for it. That's the best I could come up with.
Yeah,
I'm happy to.
And like I said, the one I got was accepting change, right? So Kay had to accept the change of his former partner's retirement, and then the change of getting a new partner, and then the change of leaving the Men in Black and knowing that all of the work that he had done would just disappear. Yeah, so that's the only thing I pulled from it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a few things going on, which we touched on.
Yeah.
But it's more about, let's face it, it's more about having a fun, entertaining sci-fi action, movie.
And you know what? That's great. Not every movie has to be filled with thematic depth.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure.
So what do you take away from Men in Black as a writer?
I think there's a few things we touched on. I'm going to go with, if you're making a movie or a story that stretches plausibility, don't be afraid to push the boundaries as long as the story is still coherent and works within the rules that you set up, the world building that you set up. That's what I would go with. What do you take away from it?
It's funny. I just wrote the words, the whole package. And for me, it's, again, the setups and the payoffs, the tight plot lines, the moving from one step to the other very quickly, very cleanly, no fat, that whole sort of well-crafted story package that I admire.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's good to reiterate those ideas. I liked also the threading from one scene to the next. I noticed that as well, at least early on in the first 3 or 4 scenes. I think they did that very well. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the movie Men in Black. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the stories told in the latest Doctor Who series. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's always fun. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.